to the very first History and Science program of the Howard Morrison History and Science series. Howard Morrison graduated from Table Rock in 1938. He came back to the alumni banquets as long as he could. He passed away just shy of 100 years old. And lo and behold, in his bequest, there was a significant bequest to the Historical Society. It wasn't six figures, but it was enough for us to buy the old Legion Hall, put a roof on it, and prepare to do some additional work on it. And in his honor, we decided to have this series. His niece, one of his nieces said, "Oh, Howard would just love this," because he just loved this kind of a program. And she asked us to call it the Popcorn and Wine series, because Howard was a dentist, but his passion was a vineyard that he had. And so they grew wine for many years as kind of a hobby. And he said they had been really poor at first, he and his wife, and he said there was many a meal that was only popcorn. So, but we didn't call it Popcorn and Wine. We have for our very first speaker, Dr. Robert Diffendal. I met him about 5 years ago when he came with the Nebraska State Geology Association to show them all of the different fabulous places to see in southeast Nebraska, not just Table Rock. He took them to the Humboldt Fault to see the fault line, to see various cuts. He's been down here a lot, and he knows this country really well. So when we started the series, he was my first person to call. And it was just before COVID started, so this has been a long time coming that we're finally able to do it. So Bob, I'm going to let you introduce yourself beyond that and take it away.
First, I have to have my technologist fix this for me now.
Sherry!
Hello. Where's the briefcase with the books and stuff? Oh, yeah, bring it down. Deal with it. All right. Well, that was a nice introduction. Carl was right. COVID bothered all of us. Still out here. Hope for the best. I came in and somebody walked up to me with an old college yearbook and showed me a picture of myself back when I had a mustache and beard, long hair, and looked like a hippie. Those of you who are old enough remember what hippies were. So that took me back. I've done a fair amount of work down here, but most of the work I've done is in the south half of the Panhandle, extending out from the east side of the south half eastward to Gothenburg and up through the Sandhills. And I've done a lot of work in Nuckolls County on over toward Alma, and then I've been on a fair amount of land up in north central Nebraska from the Cherry County line eastward to a line running north-south out of the village of Niobrara. So I've hooked around a lot of Nebraska over the years, and did do with a friend of mine. Bring me this thing before you fold. Thanks.
Test.
What's happening?
Aha!
No longer tethered, free at last. All right. So I can put this, thanks for bringing it over, and I'll bring it back. At the last page on the handouts that's stapled is a set of things. If you get interested in what I'm showing you today, you can go online, and all the books that I'll show you are online, and you can do full text download, bring it up on your computer screen, read, print it out, do whatever you want. None of it's under copyright, so it's okay to just take it and use it. So this one was done by my friend Roger Pabian, who worked at the university, and me on southeastern Nebraska, and this is basically Pawnee and Richardson County geology. And it's titled Late Paleozoic Cyclic Sedimentation. It's on the handout there, and you can take a look. Close your eyes and visualize the countryside from here where we are eastward and what it looks like. That is, go down into the river valley. Just kind of visualize that. 300 million years ago, all of the country here was underwater. A sea stretched from what's now the Gulf of Mexico to what's now the Arctic Ocean, right through here. And sea level would rise and fall through time. So just kind of think about what the countryside looks like now, and then picture these nice, fairly shallow seas covering everything here. All right. Are you? Thanks. Thank you, Ann. Here's I don't know how to do it, but I won't block you. All right. So, here's Goat Hill. This is a north to south, that is, north to south, geologic cross-section along the road going up over Goat Hill. This cuts down several hundred feet, and the section is about 8 miles from one end to the other. Here's Table Rock. Here's the highway. Here's the county road going north over Goat Hill. And the south third of that, maybe if I get over here, I can get out of everybody's way. Hey, can you see? Everybody see now? All right. So we've got. Do I want to get on the stage? Sorry. Yes. I've got it. All right. Well, I can just walk around here and let's see. Here's Bunny. All right. So, bedrock here is what geologists call Pennsylvanian rock. The color patterns, and you can see it better on the first page, I think, of your handouts, goes from oldest at the bottom to youngest at the top. And these are all ocean deposits, with the exception of the sandstone rocks going up the county road at Goat Hill. And these are deposited in a valley. We don't know how far south this valley went. It didn't go over here, because if it did, this pattern would show up on this side. So somewhere out in here this ended. But this is a filled valley of an estuary, an arm of the sea, when sea level dropped, the surface sediments were exposed. So, next. Oh, the other colors are all ice age sediments. Notice that as you go over, this would be down right about where the wildlife management area on the west side of Goat Hill Road is. Come down into the valley, go back up, and then abruptly there's a cut into this older rock that's filled up with ice age sediments. These sediments at the base, on the basis of these test holes here, here, and here, indicate that there's sand and gravel down here. So if anybody, I didn't drive that far north today, so I don't remember if there are any pivots or any irrigation systems up through here on this 6 mile or so stretch, but if there are, they'd be getting water out of this deposit. I've given you a copy of the time scale. What we see here around Table Rock are rocks of Pennsylvanian age, and those go from 300 and something, it's fuzzy so I can't make it out, to about 295 million years. And then cut down into them and left behind are ice age deposits up here. So there's a gap of close to 300 million years between rock bedrock here and these rocks. So again, valley off to the north, cut in, trending west to east, filled up with sediment, above the level of the land back here to the south. If you go south along the county road and up onto the hilltops, there are glacial deposits up here that you may have seen, and we'll talk about them a little later. Next. So here are the ocean deposits, just as a cutaway. The channel sandstone is cut down through this layer of rock. Sandstone valley is cut down and then filled up, and then seas rose and covered the land again and deposited this formation, and on top of it what's left of another formation. So let's go to this. So what was happening about 300 million years ago? Here's North America as it's developing. Here's a low relief uplands and alluvial plains and deltas and coal swamps. Here's I pulled this off the web. It must have been from Kansas because they put Kansas on here. Nebraska coming off, so we're out here. There'd be a little bit of an uplift sticking out of this shallow sea over here in western Nebraska going into Wyoming, and the start of the Ouachita Mountains down here in Oklahoma and Arkansas. So we've got a shallow, sandy to muddy sea connecting the Gulf of Mexico and the Arctic Ocean. As the ocean covered the Table Rock area throughout the Pennsylvanian, sea level rose and fell many times. So it's like we're pulling the plug out of the bathtub, water drops down, the area is exposed and slightly eroded or a little more eroded, sea level comes up, floods, sediments are brought in and deposited in that sea over and over again. Why did sea level rise and fall, Bob? One thing that was happening was that in the southern hemisphere at that time, there were ice sheets that built up, and as they built up, worldwide sea level dropped, and as the ice melted away during interglacial times, the sea level rose again, then ice built up, sea level dropped, ice melts, sea level rose over and over. And secondly, the continents, as today, are not stationary, but they're moving with respect to one another, and oceanic ridges are the generating points for the places of movement of plate tectonics. So we'll take a look at these two things. Here's 300 million years ago. Here's the Appalachians, start of the Appalachians, and North America. Here's the southern hemisphere with the ice sheets, and here's another view showing scratches in older bedrock made by the ice carrying hunks of rock like the stuff you see up here that are pulled out of pastures and farm ground, and with the directions of the ice movement on it. So here's former Antarctica, Australia, India, Africa, and South America all grouped together down here in the southern hemisphere. Next. Now, one of the things we know is that there are mid-ocean ridges that traverse the world. Here's South America and Africa, and down the middle of the Atlantic is a ridge that in places, it's a volcanic ridge, and in places the volcanoes come to the surface and they make features like the country of Iceland out here in the North Atlantic. So all of this is volcanic country and earthquake country, and it girdles the earth and makes a series of tectonic plates. The plates pull apart here where the red line is, and one plate carries the continent along. Think of it as like a conveyor belt of Amazon products being carried along. And the continents are the Amazon boxes, and the conveyor belt is the oceanic crust that's being moved along bit by bit. So here's the age of the oceanic lithosphere, and what you can see is that most of the rocks here underneath the oceans and seas of the world are geologically very young. Remember, I was talking about our rocks here being 200 million to 300 million years old. So this is beyond anything except over here where the Appalachians are forming in some other spots. Now, one of the things we know is that the ridge volcanism isn't constant, that there are periods when you have more volcanic rock piling up and pushing the plates apart, And when that happens, then you change the shape of the floors of the ocean basins so that you can push them up with respect to the continents. And if you push up the floor of the basin, what would happen to the waters of the ocean? They'd spill over onto the continents and flood the continents. And if you had a period where that volcanic activity slowed down, then you could have the rocks or the oceans actually pulling off the continents. So that plus this preceding glaciation is what triggered what we're going to look at here at table next. So this is a cycle going from non-marine, that is, out on land, when this would have looked, around Table Rock would have looked something like, well, if you've been to Louisiana, South Texas, Mississippi, Alabama, it would have had that, as you approach the Gulf of Mexico, that kind of a look to the country. So the rocks here are deposited in cycles. This would be the estuary fill, like the sandstone at Goat Hill. As the water deepened with rising oceans, then you go from on to near shore to offshore and get limestones, then far removed shales, mud rocks, back to limestones, and then back again with sea level drop to sandstones and siltstones. All right, here's a little cartoon that I drew. It'll give you maybe a little idea of what's happening. So here's the continental part of the land at any one time. And as you approach the ocean, you start at the beach. There may be some barrier sand islands offshore of the beach. If there's a big river coming down, it may empty into the ocean and make a landfill called a delta, building out into the water. Now this is what's happening right now. So visualize again, if we were to raise sea level worldwide, what would happen to this area? That would flood, and the beach then would be back in this position, this position, this position, farther on shore. And if we pulled the plug and dropped the water by one or both of the processes I just outlined, then you'd have the water dropping and the beaches shifting seaward. Everybody got it? Now, look, if I'm speaking in tongues and you don't understand what I'm saying, don't just sit there and say, hey, can you spit that out in a different way for me? Okay? All right, so let's go on. So let's look at what really has happened. Here's a slice, a satellite view of a part of the Outer Banks of North Carolina. The land is here. There was a river valley here and one here that have been flooded by sea level rise since the end of the last ice age. So this is an estuary, think Goat Hill, with that sandstone in there, the Table Rock sandstone, and offshore of the estuary is a lagoon and a sand barrier island. So again, if we pulled the plug and lowered sea level, then this estuary would drain, and there'd just be a river running through here out onto the the continental shelf offshore. What's the land look like? It's marshy and swampy and sometimes poorly drained. There are gators and things swimming around. There are birds waiting, looking for things to eat. And here's the barrier island with people in North Carolina who pay $500,000 for a lot on a sandbar that's not much bigger than the house. Well, that's another talk. At any rate, don't do it. You can rent, but don't buy. All right, next. So if we get offshore, what's the marine environment like? Well, here's a picture of part of Andros Island in the Bahamas. It's an aerial view. This is an interesting place because it's low sea level, high sea level. This is flooded. So this looks like a river drainage, but really it's just a spot where there's runoff during the low tide, and at high tide all of this is flooding. If you go offshore and swim around, the shore is, or the floor of the ocean at this point is kind of a chalky white color, and the reasons for that are that the plants have calcium carbonate, lime, that forms when they die. The plants decompose and the calcium carbonate builds up as a mud. So here are the plants that actually are generating this, and then of course there are clams and snails and other things with shells that add to the sediment that builds up over time. Here we are swimming out down along the Florida Keys and looking at a coral reef. So that's another place that potentially could look like what we have here. Next. Now here's Pennsylvanian limestone and shale beds exposed in an abandoned quarry in Cass County, Nebraska, near the between Weeping Water with Highway 50 going through it and Epauca off to the east. And this is a group of some students from Doane who were out with me looking at these rocks and measuring the rock layers and doing some other activities. The limestones are harder than shale rocks here in Nebraska, so the limestones do not break down as fast as the shale turns to mud, and the limestones form ledges that stick out from the old abandoned quarry face. That's a hunk of limestone. Shale's just mud out here in the grassy surface. Okay, so this is offshore going. Shales would be deeper, farther from shore, limestones in shallower water. Thank you. Now here's Roger Pabian, my co-author on the book I showed you. Roger is standing now. We went to Tuttle Creek Reservoir. You remember when they had the big rains? It's been more than 10 years ago down there that flooded down through Tuttle Creek at Manhattan. And they scoured out the bedrock down from the dam that blocks the water and makes the reservoir, and exposed this rock surface, amongst others. And in here are rocks called stromatolites, which have a geologic record that goes back almost 3 billion years from today back that far. And the cyanobacteria that produce these things build up when when high tide comes in. They build up over the surface of these biscuit-shaped or loaf-shaped rocks, and sediment gets churned up, comes in contact with this kind of a sticky, oozy green film that binds the sediment layer upon layer. So here's the first formed layer, gets bigger through time. So we have that here in places in Nebraska and down into Kansas. Thanks. Ann told me this morning, we were reading the Journal Star newspaper, and the Steamboat Trace Trail along the Missouri has been opened up again. Hooray for that. If you go to Peru, Nebraska, and walk the trail south for about a mile or so, over on the west side, the bluff side of the trail, you'll see sandstones just similar to the ones out here, but an older cycle of cutting and filling than the one here. So here's freshwater and marginal marine fish, land, reptiles, and plants from Peru, Nebraska. There was a valley cut out, then sea level rose flooding the valley. There are plants growing along the valley sides and fishes in the water, and those things are preserved in the sandstones. Next. So what do these land plants look like? They, as with all plants, usually what you get are just individual leaves or stems or roots or something, but you do find here's a stem with clusters of leaflets on it, and this is a fossil. It's unlike anything that we have today. There are no flowering plants in the Pennsylvanian. There are no palm trees or anything of that sort. These are more primitive plants, and they include scouring rushes, which we have here in wet, moist places along rivers even today. They're, if you see them, they're segmented like bamboo, and you can pull them apart at these segment points. But these particular ones are tree-sized rather than, well, I've never seen anything much larger in diameter than this on these horsetails or scouring rushes, and they'll grow up to about this height maximum here in Nebraska. Next. So what are the fossils like from the oceans? You'll find in some places shells of a shelled cephalopod. We have in these Pennsylvanian age rocks nautiloids, which are secreted by a thing that's related to squid and octopus, but it makes a shell. It starts out as a tiny free-swimming larval stage here, secretes a little shell, and if something doesn't come along and eat it, or it doesn't die immediately, it adds to the shell and makes this spiral arrangement with internal plates that the backside of the animal makes that butt up against but are separate from the outside shell. It's really amazing stuff. And here's a cutaway through one of these shells, and you can see how it starts out and then just builds up through time. The living chamber of the animal is the last chamber here in the shell. And here's a fossil one from Nebraska where the open space between plates is filled in with mineral material. Next. We have calcareous sponges. There are some of these that, there's another wildlife management area. If you go over to Humboldt and go south, and I've forgotten the state road number, but if you go south almost to the Kansas border and take a county road to the east, there's a wildlife management area, and you can find fossils of calcareous sponges over just by the parking lot into that wildlife management area. So we find fossil sponges, we find corals that look like honeycomb, we find corals that look like horns of cattle, and here's a cluster of them. So the maximum size on these horn corals would be about 1 foot long. So here are other ocean fossils. These are brachiopods, bivalve clam shells. Here's one that's like the shell oil symbol. Here's another nautiloid cephalopod and snail shells. Next. And crinoids. I saw some crinoids that some of the people brought in earlier. Here's the column coming off that attaches the cup and tentacles down to the seafloor. There are brittle stars, edrioasteroids, all five-fold symmetry, and sand dollars. Trilobites here and here. This is an X-ray through a rock showing the legs, the appendages of trilobites. Thanks. And I saw in one of the specimens on the table before most of you came in, a burrow that had been produced by something eating its way through the sediment, leaving a tubular opening that filled in later with sediment to produce this filled-in, sediment-filled burrow. Here's another one that branches in this rock. We find shark teeth in the rocks from around here. They're nice pointy things, all the better to eat you with. Next. And some bony fish, where you actually get the full skeleton of the thing preserved in some of the limestones. Next. All right, back to what's going on here. We're looking at C, D, and E. C up here going up toward the top of Goat Hill. D and E from a test hole drilled down here. Here's the view at C. These sandstones are irregularly cemented. There's harder calcium carbonate or iron oxide cement in some layers than there is in others. So the looser sands wash out and make these interesting features. They're ocean amoeboid protozoan fossil shells that were recovered in the drilling down through this sand, and also some bits of crinoids. Next. So here are some historical images I pulled off the web. This is back, has to be in the fall, no leaves on the trees, and in the days where women wear very long skirts to go out. Next. So the table rock would have been one of these things, an erosional remnant sticking up kind of like a mushroom with a flat top that's gone, but you can visualize it. Next. Go back?
Yeah,
Go back.
The one on the left is Turtle Rock, and it's still there, where somebody built up a little color underneath it years ago.
Now, this is not the time to go prowling around there because there's a lot of poison ivy out on those hillsides. And I recommend either after all the leaves are down or before it really starts budding out in the spring. Next. Thank you. Here again, you can see how there are places where the sand is softer and less cemented, and that washes out and undercuts and forms these. Where the cement is harder, holding the grains together, you get these pieces. Next. So we'll go from that. This is F, G, H, and I, south of the river. And this is a test hole along the county line road there. And here are calcium carbonate shells in a mud rock. Here are rootlets and burrows filled in a siltstone. Here's a calcium carbonate grain that's like a pool ball shape, cut in half, and then calcium carbonate grains in limestone. So those are all over in the rocks you see. Okay, we can go next. There's a big gap in the geologic record between these rocks at 300 million years old and these that start at 2.58 million that form the valley fills that cut into the older rocks. Big gap here, but on the separate map that Ann gave you, if you look at that one, again, lady in the red here has it, there's a cross section along the Kansas line. And the explanation on the left-hand side, geologically, on all geologic maps, we put the oldest rocks at the bottom, getting younger toward the top in the explanation. And the oldest rocks are Precambrian, really ancient rocks, getting younger as you go. You can notice that there are Cretaceous rocks shown in green on that cross section, I think. And those rocks, as you go eastward, come up, and you get exposures of these over in Jefferson County and western Gage County. And then you see they're coming up toward the land surface in the cross section. So I think those rocks used to be over this area, but it's all just been eroded away. That's part of the reason we have this big gap in geology here in Pawnee and Richardson counties. Okay, next. So again, here we are, we're at Table Rock, looking eastward toward Goat Hill. If you go off and take the road past the sawmill and go back up on top here, at this point, you see layers of glacial deposits with these big bubblegum pink rocks along the county roads that are part of the glacial deposits that are 2.58 million years old. So there's a map showing out of my book on Great Plains geology, and this is a National Atlas one, but I've modified it. Here's the last big ice age and an ice sheet covering this part of North America. Older ice ages, the Nebraskan and Kansan and Illinoisan, actually the ice extended down through the central United States farther to the south than the last one did here. And this is what's covering our land outside. So originally. So this is what I call bubblegum pink rock. How many of you have seen this stuff? Well, if you haven't been looking very hard. Okay, so here we see it out on the surface, pulled out of fields. There are a couple of places down in Kansas, west of Lawrence, where these are actually so concentrated, they form a pavement on the tops of some of the hills down there. And where's this stuff from? It's from Sioux Falls and north of Sioux Falls. The falls at Sioux Falls flow over this hard, cemented sandstone rock called a orthoquartzite. Next. It's all right. Yo.
Can you tell us how those Can you tell us how those big rocks came here? You just said they were brought here. I remember somebody talking about the bulldozer.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's go back. That's forward. We're almost done, but whoops. What happened? Okay. What happened? All right, here's this Laurentide ice sheet. It actually started out as 3 masses of glacial ice that coalesced, and they started moving off from this in all these directions. So the ice here picked up the rocks here in South Dakota and carried them just like a road grader down here through eastern Nebraska and got them this far. There's still pieces of it in the ice when it was in this position. As the ice melted away, the deposits that it carried were left behind, blanketing the surface of eastern Nebraska over into Iowa, and that's what's bringing the ice movement is bringing the rock down here from up there.
And how old are those rocks?
Those rocks, these quartzites are 1 billion years old.
And how old is the glacier soil?
Oh, well, it's, okay, the Illinoisan deposits are 600,000. These deposits, Kansas and Nebraska, are from 2.58 to about 2 million years.
So those rocks are older than dirt.
Oh, yes, much older than dirt. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at A and B. This would be up north of Goat Hill, 1, 2, 3, 7. About 4.5 miles north of 5 north of Goat Hill on that road. And here we can see hills and gullies in glacial till and alluvium with landslides where these mud rocks have been undercut by drainages, and you get the pasture sliding down and being carried down slope beneath. Here's right out here in the valley. This is the channel deposits, sandbars and mud bars and gravels in them. Some of the people here brought in specimens they collected off the bars locally. They're back on the table back there. And then here's an exposure of older river deposits exposed in this cut bank on the south side of the valley. So A's over here and down onto the bar in this channel. If you go up on top, this is the farmland on top of the alluvium or river deposits that you see as you drive across the Nemaha to go till. This is the youngest stuff. This is younger than, much younger than 10,000 years before the present. And this is right now, at the time of the photo. Okay, next. All right. Well, you never want to let a professor start talking, he just wanders around and so on. But that's it. Any questions?
Well, I'll start out with some questions. So, you've given us a lot of different geological periods and mentioned some different eras, but it's not clear in my mind what's the oldest. So,
Under here?
what about the rocks at Goat Hill? How old are they're from?
They're 300 million, give or take,
Okay.
a day or two.
Okay. And then going up, then the next significant thing that we can see in our daily lives would be
is this that's less than 3 million year old deposits, mostly glacial deposits.
okay.
And those are being actively eroded and carried down slope in tributaries to the Nemaha, and they go into the Nemaha, and most of them are continuing to be flushed down into the Missouri. So there's a lot of this county that's in the Gulf of Mexico.
I think a lot of people here are acutely aware of that.
Okay.
What you see in your data, really two times the geologic. So if you look at the geologic column and there are the two arrows, you're actually seeing rocks from two time periods. The oldest are in blue. Okay, and that was the marine, that was the coming and going to sea. Then there's this big gap right here. And then on top of that is these other more brownish looking, and that's the top arrow on the column. Okay?
Then you showed us a lot of different fossils. How can you tell whether how do you know that the ocean was receding or growing or falling? Are there different kinds of fossils for different ocean sizes?
Okay, there are some animals and plants, ocean plants, that live only in the water column, and from the surface down to the bottom of the photic zone, that's how far light will penetrate. You have plants either on the ocean floor surface or up in the water column. There are invertebrates that swim around in the water, and there are animals that live on the sediment surface of the seafloor at any one time, and other animals that burrow through. Most of the limestone rocks that you see here have been burrowed through, and the lime mud, before the rock hardened into limestone, the lime mud is basically some multiple, make a really big number, national debt, a lot of animals have pooped a lot of carbonate mud.
When you say the ocean was shallow here, what is shallow?
Well, to me, I'd say anything 300 feet or less.
Okay, so that many million years ago, we'd be looking up to 300 feet of water.
Yeah, well, you'd be down below the photic zone, so it would be black, but if you came up to where light penetrated, you'd be looking up through a water column.
And then one of the most common fossils that we find here are the crinoids,
Yes,
plant or animal.
those are animals. They are related to starfish and sea urchins and brittle stars and
And,
sea cucumbers.
okay. And what do they tell us about what the ocean was like when they were alive?
Well, it couldn't have been too turbulent, otherwise, well, the ones that I saw on the table and rocks over here have been broken apart, but if you get a whole crinoid, that tells you that the animal died in water where you didn't have a lot of currents and wave activity.
Okay. How long was the ocean there?
Well, it was on and off from Sioux Quartzite time, 1 billion years ago, up until 66 million, the end of the Cretaceous, the end of the so-called Jurassic Park, but the early Cretaceous dinosaurs on land. So most of out here in the mid-continent, from the Rockies eastward, has been ocean much longer than it's been land.
Very good. Now, I'm sure we've got questions. We have people here from Humboldt and Pawnee, and I know some people have driven down from Omaha that are interested in the area. So, do we have some questions? Something he's not covered?
Now, did you get one of my business cards?
We've got some here we can hand out.
Yeah. My email address is on the bottom of the business card. If you have email and you have a question anytime, fire it off, I'll answer it. I'm retired, but I'm doing the same stuff I was doing at the university before I retired, only now I'm not on salary. That's a good deal for all of us. Yes, speak to me, wait a minute. Yeah.
The numbers, the ages of the various rock layers or whatever.
Yeah.
Could you explain how that is, the numbers are determined?
Yes, I can try. It'll take a whole course, a semester or so. But let me get down off of this. How can we come up with the numbers? All right. Now, to begin with, all geologists could do would be to go out and look at these layered rocks. And here's one thing that we know for absolute sure and certain, and that is that they're deposited or laid down with the first formed or oldest layer always at the bottom, getting younger toward the top of the pile. And so, starting out, well, mostly since 1669, which isn't that long ago in human long-term thing, people who like study rocks went out, and they're still doing it today, and they're correlating or matching up one place with another based on the kinds of fossils that are found in the rocks. The oldest or first formed layers in the world have, if they have fossils, they're different from anything up here in the pile or up higher. Okay, so you can correlate or match them up. So you can say, this is older than this, which is, this is older than this. But you don't know in terms of years ago how old the rock is. And no one knew for sure until we began to be able to determine the age of minerals in rock by by the proportions of radioactive elements compared to the daughter breakdown products in the particular minerals that are in the rock. Now, when you get the card, send me an email. Are you on email? Yes? Okay. Send me an email and say, send the more complex geologic ages, because on that, and I can do it for anybody who sends it in, I just attach it as a file and send it to you and you can print it out. All right. There are places where one group of fossil organisms become extinct in the rock layer, and then you go up and there's a totally different bunch of kinds of organisms. So some of these, there are volcanic ash deposits or there are meteor impact deposits that you can date here's a card. You can date the minerals in those deposits, and that tells you how old the break is between these older rocks and younger rocks. That's called a golden spike. Okay, and so we've gone out and we've dated all these things, like where's the end of the Pennsylvania and the start of the Permian? Where's the end of the Permian and the start of the Triassic? Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous, blah, blah, blah. Up and down in the column. And we've got places that you could go to in the world that are senior moment. Okay, places in the world where that's where that break point was made. You can walk up to that place and collect a sample yourself, and if you have the lab to do it, you can date it and find out whether the people who were dating the deposit were full of baloney or knew what they were talking about. Now, the dating has gotten so good on this stuff over the last 30 years. You know, think about it. When did we start looking at CSI on TV? The machines have gotten so much better since that first running that TV show that you can do stuff that no one could do 30 years ago. So that's what's happening. We're just dating these deposits.
Okay. Follow-up question.
Sure.
Goat Hill was dated by what?
All right.
Uranium, lead?
What we've got are the fossils that match up with the fossils at the place in the Pennsylvanian that has datable stuff. So we're correlating on the basis of fossils. From Goat Hill hasn't been radiometrically dated so far as I know, but it matches that place and it matches the stage of evolution of the organisms.
So then you're actually figuring that evolution is the correct interpretation of all things as a starting point.
What's been happening to COVID? It's been evolving. Things evolve. Now, you don't see it in human populations because it takes so long from generation to generation to generation that you may not be observing anything. You know, I mean, you start thinking, I don't have anything back in photographs. My great-grandmother, if there's anything beyond that, I don't know what it is. So, I'm sorry, but evolution is a fact.
More questions?
Yep.
What's your predictions for the next 300 million years?
Say anything, nobody will.
Yeah. Come back to me in 300 million years from now. It's going to be a lot hotter and a lot drier.
We'll never see sea level rise on those geologic.
Well, I don't know, because what's blowing up the continents is the subterranean heat down in the Earth's mantle. And if we start losing that heat, then the ocean basins will start to go down, and it'll be offshore. But if the heat builds up, and there are absolutely certainly cycles of heating up faster and cooling off faster within the Earth. So we could flood the continent again.
Without ice coming.
Well,
Can't hear the question.
what about ice coming again? Well, before we started messing around with the atmosphere, and any of you who think that we aren't changing the atmosphere, I helped change it driving down here. All right. Before that, there were cycles of long-term cycles of cooling and heating going on throughout what's called the Quaternary on your geologic timescale. And the cycles are 11,000 years long. They're sun cycles. The sun actually varies the amount of radiation coming off of it in 11,000 year cycles. Some guy named Milosevic, he's from one of those southern European countries, having nothing better to do with his time, sat there and doodled out what was happening with climate and came up with this 11,000 year cycle that really works. And so if we hadn't messed with things, that would have kept going on. But when you change the atmosphere composition and put in more gases that stop radiation getting back out through the atmosphere, you're going to heat up the atmosphere and the whole world. People don't think about it, but there are climatologists all over the world, and there are instruments now all over the world that we didn't have 50 or 60 years ago, and you can tell what's happening to the climate, because all these stations every day at 6 p.m. local time send in their numbers. So at any rate, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to be hot.
Back here.
Can you tell us what's happening on this?
Wow, that's the Nemaha fault zone.
Is it sinking on the east side of that?
Yeah. If you look, the offset to the blue layers on the east side is down. You come up over the top, which is this Precambrian, really ancient rock being pushed up, and go back over, and you're coming toward into Pawnee County and getting that same set of blue colors. You see it?
Yeah. That's not pushing this up, is it? Or are they?
No, that's
Can't hear the questions.
it's not pushing the up thrown block isn't pushing. No, it's not pushing much of anything now, but there still are earthquakes along that fault zone. And the thing that might interest you, it interests me, is that Brownville and Fort Calhoun nuclear power plants are on that fault trend. All right? Well, there are earthquake faults everywhere. Go out to Harlan County Reservoir. I've got a paper that's in that digital commons stuff on Harlan County Lake and Reservoir and its history. And I've showed on there, I found 20 earthquake faults. And the Corps of Engineers, before they put that dam in, they went across where the dam is and encountered all kinds of faults going across there. And they said, well, we don't see anything coming up through this historical sediment. So there probably won't be a big damaging earthquake in the lifetime of the reservoir. Probably. Yeah. Well, we do silly things. I walked in, at Hoover Dam. I took the tour decades ago down into Hoover Dam to see the generators and all that good stuff. And I'd been out, you could park on the dam at that point. There were some parking spaces. I'd been out on there taking pictures downriver and back toward Lake Mead. And the rocks are just all cracked and broken and offset. And so I was talking, the engineer was giving us the spiel about the dam, and I said, now, did you take all these earthquake faults into account when you put this dam in? And he said, what earthquake faults?
So, that hill south of Humboldt is supposed to be a good place to find rvlife fossils.
Yeah, there's the best place I ever saw, and it's on private land and not trespass. If you go down 75 from Marysville, before you get to the drop off down into the Blue River, there's a Kansas highway that goes off to the east. You go about 5 or 6 miles east and north of the highway, there's quarry, abandoned quarry. And there, even I could find troglodytes, that means they're pretty easy and pretty abundant. But yeah, they're bound to be places. There's a place over, I think it's in the guidebook, that blue covered guidebook down here south and east of Humboldt. Or if you go up to that wildlife management area I was telling you about, and you walk upslope to the east on the north side of the road, there's a layer about a foot thick, and it's entirely composed of very tiny snail shells, rock cemented snail shells. And it's younger geologically. I think it's still Pennsylvanian, but higher up in the rock column than what we have here. But it's just amazing. It looks like concrete when you break it out, and then you take your lens out and start looking, and here are all these little coiled up snail shells. Yes? Again?
How does that fit in all of this?
It doesn't. All right. The High Plains Regional Aquifer, aka the Ogallala, which is the main part of it, does not extend this far east. If you go over to Fairbury, go up north of the Little Blue, there's all this pivot irrigation, and right there from there to, it's a Chinese named little spot on the road toward Beatrice. That's where the pivots start going out, because that's the end of the aquifer. The end of the aquifer goes from there. It'd be roughly around the Big Blue River west into the Panhandle. So we don't have it here. Our aquifers here locally are either, say, in that sand and gravel at the bottom of the cross section over there at the north end, or river alluvium. There's somebody irrigating their fields down here on the floodplain of the river, and they're getting their water by pumping out of the aquifer that's connected to the river. Okay. there's, I suggested that when you get onto those major sites that you just kind of go year through year, there's a report. Send me an email and ask me to give you the URL for this report on the aquifers of Nebraska, and that covers what's around in this area and everywhere else in the state. Okay. Or the groundwater atlas of Nebraska is good, and you can access that because I gave you the URL for it. Which I don't know what URL means, but whatever it means, you type it out and hit the button and boom, up comes whatever you're looking for. Yeah.
What is the difference between the caves that are here at Tamrock and the caves at like Brownville, the Indian City caves?
Well, it's the same kind of rock. Brownville is older, you know, it's the Indian cave sandstone as opposed to the white cloud, so it's in this bunch of layers underneath here. Okay, but the rock is cemented in the same way. It looks for all the world the same. You'd think, oh, wow, mine is like that, but it isn't. Yeah, different. Brownville is older than here.
Any more questions?
Yes, sir. Oh, and if I don't know the answer to a question you send me, I'll try and find somebody who can answer it. Yes.
How long did the last ice age last?
Well, would be the Lake Wisconsin, and on that map I showed you. That started about 20,000 years ago and lasted for about 10,000. So you wouldn't want to, you'd all have been going down and immigrating into Honduras and Guatemala, and the locals wouldn't like you, and it's all that stuff. Yeah.
Are there any hydrocarbons down there?
No, there might be, there's some down in Richardson County. There's still some stripper wells down there producing a little bit of petroleum. Well, you've got Elk Creek and Steiner with these carbonatites. If they ever get the money together and start mining, that'd be a really good thing for me. I just, I'm soft living, if somebody can find something that, it's not my backyard, and produce stuff that'll make my life easier, I'm all for it, but it's just me, I'm old and set in my ways.
All right. We have some refreshments over here. My sister Sherry, as most of you know, is our local baker. And she asked what she could provide that would be appropriate. And I told her that Bob was an expert in fossils, so she made dinosaurs. And after this, anybody who wants to go out to Goat Hill in about 15 minutes, we will line up in front of the hotel and we will caravan out there. We will, if you don't know where Goat Hill is, you go east of town. It's the first highway to the left. We'll go up the hill.
It's the first county road to the left after you get across the river.
Yes. And you'll have to go up the hill, probably go down a mile and turn around, or however you want to do it. Be sure to park. There's only a berm on the west side of the road. So park the west side of the road. And Bob, you want everybody to walk to the bottom and meet at the bottom?
No.
At the top.
We'll stay near the top. First of all, it's hot. Can you hear me back there? It's hot.
It's hot.
It's humid. I don't want to walk to the bottom of the hill and have to walk back up.
All right.
We'll go up and park at the near the top and then walk a little bit downhill. What I wanted to show you is the ocean deposits, the layers with ocean fossils in them on top of the sandstone. And that's where we'll see that. It's in the cross section there. It's in the cross section where you go out of that sand and you get into one of the blue colors representing younger layers on top. And that's the ocean stuff on top of the sand.
So we're not going to see the rocks at Goat Hill. We're just going to go to the road and observe some of the geological layers.
And you remember why we're not going to see the rocks at Goat Hill. Poison ivy! I didn't think I ever got the stuff, and then I was doing a study decades ago on land snails, and I was collecting them down on the floodplain of the Missouri at south of Peru, and then on down toward Rulo. And this was in the fall of the year, and I was digging out of the soil and without gloves, and hit some poison ivy roots, and I just was miserable for a long time. Don't do that.
All right. Yeah, and if you need handouts, we have a few left here. Now, this is the first. We've got three of these programs lined up for science and history. The next one next month is about the local trees, including the table rock maples, the blackjack oaks, trees that are truly unique to Nebraska and truly unique to southeast Nebraska. And a couple of the arborists will be coming from the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum to talk about them. And then that's next month, and the month after that, we're going to have a talk about surveying, which you might think, oh, surveying, well, you guys out there with the whatever. Well, it is fascinating. Just think this whole Midwest before there were any boundary lines. Who had to figure out where the heck the latitude and the longitude was? The surveyors went out in 1854 when Nebraska was declared a territory and apportioned out of Indian land. And the history is fascinating because a lot of those rocks and boundaries that they placed are still there and still being used. And so that the reason I say so much about this is our lecturer is sitting in the back row, Rob Tiki, who's a certified surveyor in Nebraska. So I'm looking forward to that. And the next one after that is not planned, but I'm trying to get hold of a geohydrologist, Bob will help me, I just haven't had time, who will come and talk about the river, straightening the river, the changes in the river, what's going on with it, historically what. Corps of Engineers has photographs, records, documents, and I think that would be truly an interesting subject. So keep your eyes peeled. We'll have a few more things like this. So I'd like to say thank you to Bob and to his wife Ann, who's been hanging out. So thank you to Sherry for making the cookies and for Shannon for posting this online. And enjoy a few cookies, and in about 15 minutes, anybody who wants to go and brave the heat will be outside.